Having great financial fitness as an entrepreneur, leader, and person can provide unparalleled confidence in your daily life. Today we sit down with Tracey Bissett, a financial fitness trainer who started her own firm to educate and empower leaders and young adults on how to take full control of their financial lives. In this conversation, we talk about how the educational systems do not really prepare individuals for financial literacy, and how an increase in financial acumen can lead to simple, new financial routines that will help any business or person. We hope you enjoy this episode and take steps to further your financial acumen as a result.
Tracey, thanks for joining us today on the Entrepreneurs United podcast. Excited to talk about financial fitness today. You're a financial fitness trainer for both executives, entrepreneurs, but also teens, I see in your background. Can you tell us a little bit about how that came to be, where you're from, and a little bit of your background?
Absolutely. And so just before we hit record, we were talking about how we both come from Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, which is in Canada. So I lived there just for a short time when I was a kid, grew up mostly on the east coast of Canada and Nova Scotia, and then made my way to Ontario. So right now I'm based in Toronto, Ontario, which is pretty much the biggest city we've got here. I had about 16 years with TD Bank, so one of Canada's big 5 banks, and I got recruited out of my MBA to work with commercial clients, helping them get access to financing that they needed. Moved up into more senior positions over the years and actually got into loan adjudication. So really helping entrepreneurs directly or indirectly get access to the funds they needed. As often happens with big companies, there was restructuring, and so my seat was taken away from the table. And so instead of instantly getting on my resume and getting a replacement job, I took the time with my fair severance to figure out what would I like to do, and I really packaged up all the things that I love to do. So number one, making money straightforward for people, helping take the mystery out of it. I loved teaching people, and I used to do a lot of courses with human resources to teach younger lenders. So I've secured a teaching position as well. And I loved all my time working with entrepreneurs. I wanted to make sure that was still a big component. So Bissett Financial Fitness was formed. And as you mentioned, John, I spend most of my time coaching with business owners, whether in a group program or one-on-one. And then I am the host of the Young Money podcast, which is all geared for young adults to help them with money and get all the things out that they need to know. So this week, my episode is all about what we can learn about financial fitness from Adele, because she just had her big concert and interview with Oprah. So let's see what we can learn from her. And I think we can learn about money from anything out there. So it's always
That's great. When did this transition happen from corporate TD Bank to you know what, I'm going to go create a business for myself?
2016. So I found out at the end of 2015, and then I incorporated probably March of 2016. And then I was figuring stuff out for a while. So figuring out what is it that I'm going to offer, how exactly am I going to do this? And because I had a fair severance, I took my time. So I wasn't in a desperate rush to get stuff out there. And so I took my time. I had to get some new people to hang out with because I had lots of friends in corporate who didn't know anything about running a business either. And so I had to get some entrepreneur friends. I got a business coach and really started building out my network and support system to help me do all of the things I needed to do. I was great at like 3 things when I was at the bank, and then I had to start wearing about 50 hats. So had to get some new skills and then find some other people to supplement the skills that you need when you're running a business.
Yeah, I love that. There's a good saying that I follow, which is, if you want to find success, find something you're passionate about. Find something you can make a lot, good amount of money doing, feed your economic engine, and something you can be the best in the world at. Talk to us a little bit about, you started teaching on the subject of financial fitness and obviously coaching on the subject of financial fitness. Why was that a passion for you, beyond your banking experience? Why was that the thing for you versus just business coaching in general or life coaching in general? Why was it financial fitness? Why did that strike a chord for you?
Ever since I was a little kid, I have loved money. So around 6-7 years of age, I remember one summer very clearly, I wanted to go to the corner store every day. And so the first day I went to my mom and she gave me a quarter and off I went. So I went back on Tuesday of my vacation and she said, no, Tracey, once a week, you can have 25 cents. That's it. Like, we've got money, but not for that. So I thought, well, okay, I don't really like that answer, but I've heard her. She's not giving me any more money. So outside with my friend, we brainstormed all kinds of ways to make money because I learned that with money, you can do things or get things that you want to make your life enriched. And so I've been pretty unemotional about money for a very long time. And so I like to be able to pass that on to other people, because I think with a little bit of creativity, lots of hard work, you can certainly make money no matter what your skill set is. So I've been really passionate about that. We would have lemonade stands. We would have little garage sales. We would make up clubs and charge kids to come in our club. We had a neighborhood newspaper. So you name it, we probably did it to keep us going to the store to get those slushies or sour soothers or whatever we wanted that day. But it worked out, and that really stuck with me. And I know that so many people don't have that kind of unemotional view about money. And my dad was a banker, so we talked about money a lot in our household, and I know that's not common. So I know that when you can understand it, it really clears up a lot of things in your life. So you can focus on whatever it is that you are passionate about, whatever you really want to focus on, and you don't have all those stresses that come from the money. And that can affect your relationships, your health, physical and mental. Just permeates through your whole life.
Sure. So you start working with entrepreneurs and executives. And I think you said before, a lot of people, a lot of circles you hung around with weren't necessarily entrepreneurs or executives themselves. But you start working with entrepreneurs and executives. What was the biggest problem you saw in the way that entrepreneurs or executives viewed money themselves? And are you specifically talking about personal wealth, or are you talking about business money as well?
The biggest problem overall that kind of overarches personal and business is the fact that people ignore it. So they either delegate it completely to somebody else, so personally a financial planner, or on the business side an accountant or a bookkeeper, or they've got their heads buried in the sand that if I just work really hard, everything's going to work out in my whole life. So that's kind of the biggest theme. I'm generally working now with companies, sales are under 2 million. So we're really in a defined space. So when I start working with these business owners across all different industries, they're really uncomfortable around money for the most part. They usually, I would love to say they come to work with me when they're wanting to improve their financial acumen. But honestly, it's because they've hit some point in their business and they know if I don't make some changes on the financial side, my business isn't going to be around and I'm not going to be able to get through it this time. And so sometimes I work with business owners who are starting. Sometimes they've been 10, 20 years in business, but they've just hit that point and they know they need to move beyond it. So it's the first thing is really that lack of accountability.
Yeah. So it's interesting when you think about it, right? That entrepreneurs start a business, they create a business plan, a sales plan, and they go after it. But what typically where the rubber hits the road is maybe a lack of, understanding, or they hit a roadblock on the finance side. And you can turn to your CPA certainly for taxes and different things. Why would one need a fitness trainer in the in the financial fitness side of things? What does that mean exactly in your language when you talk to people? Because you didn't use the word coach, you used a financial fitness trainer. What does that mean to you?
So it's really around education and bringing up someone's financial acumen. So a lot of times I hear from my clients, well, how come my accountant didn't teach me? That's not their job. Their job is not an educator. If they do sometimes do that, that's kind of over and above what you're paying them for. They're there to produce your tax returns. They're there to do your financial statements, help you with your remittances. But what business owners need is actually an increase in their financial acumen. And it's not from a one-time only training. They actually need to practice like you do with your physical fitness and get into routines and build new habits. And so that's why I approach it that way. And I'm purely coming at it from how can we bring up the skill set. One of the things I found is there's tons of embarrassment and shame around not knowing the financial side of your business. And I know in the US, it's very much the same in Canada. We do a very poor job of even educating about personal finance all the way through school. If you happen to take something about business, it's probably not very much around how do you run it on the financial side. And unfortunately, business owners feel like they're supposed to know how to do it when they don't know. And there's never the same shame when it comes to sales or marketing or operations. They're going to go out and hire somebody that they need to help them, but all that baggage doesn't come with it. And unfortunately, that shows up on the financial side. So for everybody listening and watching, it's okay. It's not your fault, but now you got to take control of it. So do what you need to do to bring up your financial acumen, and what new routines do you have to put in place to be able to train like an athlete on that financial side of your business.
Great. Thanks for that, Tracey. And can you give our listeners either an overview of the curriculum or just a sneak peek into when you say financial acumen and what business owners need to learn, what is it? And then maybe we can get into a couple of those details to kind of give a sample of your work to our listeners.
Sure. So the very first thing I do is do a financial assessment when I'm working one-on-one with a client of their business. So I'm looking at their financial statements, I'm interpreting them, I'm comparing them to industry benchmarks, as well as kind of year over year in their own performance. And then I'm walking them through it. So we usually spend a lot of time at this point actually going through the financial statements and helping them understand how to read them. When this is happening, what does this mean? Because the statement most business owners know is the profit and loss or income statement that shows all the sales and the expenses. And that's the one they kind of peek at. Most business owners aren't looking at a balance sheet. And so seeing all of that from a third party perspective with comparison to benchmarks is very informative for them. So I'm not saying they've soaked it all up yet, but they're certainly building on their foundation. From there, we move into lessons around understanding the cash flow cycle of the business. So every industry is different, and even businesses within the same industry can have different cash flow cycles. And to keep it super simple, money comes in, money goes out. That timing that it happens in your business is really the cash flow cycle. So you have to understand yours so you can make sure that even though you might be profitable, you're making more sales than expenses, you got to make sure you have cash there on the day. You've got to make payroll, or you've got to pay your rent, or all your other bills. And so understanding that cash flow cycle. And it is an element of coaching, because I have them, the clients, create their own cash flow forecast. And so I support them, train them, give them the tools to do it. But I want them to be kind of in the pain of it and the struggle of actually figuring it out. From there, we create a dashboard with key performance metrics based on their industry, their business, things that they want to keep track of. We've got some dashboard reporting. And then the final thing is really doing a deep dive on pricing. So John, you mentioned it earlier that business owners make these business plans before they get going. In my experience, that's not always the case. And so when you do a business plan is the very best time to drill down on your pricing, make sure you're actually going to be profitable. But with the businesses I'm working at with sales under 2 million, they're generally not profitable and they're not getting steady paychecks. So when we can dig into pricing, we can really get to the bottom of it. And it's not about throwing everything out and starting a business over. It's what can be tweaked so that the profitability can come. And that's usually a really favorite session, I would say, for the entrepreneurs, because they're like, wow, okay, now that I know the numbers and I'm not kind of ignoring them, if I do this and this and this, I can make more money. And it could be as simple as bumping up your prices. You might have been afraid to do it before. And when we get into that kind of conversation, depending on the client and their willingness to go there, a lot of it's around what were you thinking and experiencing when you were a little kid? Between 5 and 7 years of age is when you form those money views. So if in your household there was doors slamming, or people were crying, or there was yelling, or there was we don't have money for that. Not like in my case where it was a conscious choice, my parents weren't giving it to me, but that there just wasn't. All that's going to stay with you. And so it can make it hard for you to price yourself to the value that you need to be, and to the level you need to be based on what you're offering. So really, and then we kind of wrap it all up. So lots covered in generally a 2 to 3 month time span. And I can say that the journey's not over at that point. They're going to go forward. And the goal is to transfer what I know over to them in a context that makes sense for their particular business.
Makes sense. On the financial assessment, you are looking at the industry benchmarks and year over year numbers to kind of give a view versus a baseline. And then the 2 reports that you mentioned were a profit and loss statement and balance sheet. Are there other reports that you dig into? And if so, what are they?
There may be schedules to the financial statements we dig into. If they happen to have a budget where they're looking at the forward performance as they see it. If they had a cash flow forecast, certainly would look at that as well. We may dig into their accounts receivable listing if they have the customers who pay them later to see what's the trending going on here. Do you have a lot of people who pay you in 60 or 90 days after you do work for them? Do you have some that have been on there for a really long time and you've actually got to make some changes about how you collect your money? So whatever they've got available, the companies under 2 million, they don't often always have bookkeeping. So they might only get their statements done once a year. The better ones have monthly bookkeeping. And so it's a function of how can they fill in the gaps for me with what they know and what's happening in the business versus what actual information do they have that we can dig into.
Got it. And what's the technology that you recommend for those that you consult with?
From a bookkeeping standpoint, if they're of the size that they're going to do it, I mean, I'm a big fan of QuickBooks. Any kind of standard accounting software is fine. The work that we're doing is usually Excel based. But what I like to tell business owners, because some have not used Excel very extensively, and so there's a little bit of a learning curve, if we can't have a conversation and get to the crux of the issue kind of with pen and paper, just talking it through, we're making it too hard. So let's figure out conceptually and what we think is going on with high level numbers, and then we can go deeper and get into the more specific stuff. But we should be able to talk through it and get from a kind of a coffee table chat to the issues that are happening just by the questions I'm going to ask and the answers they're providing.
And do you have a general recommendation on QuickBooks Online versus desktop?
Usually online is preferred, especially if you're working with a bookkeeper or an accountant who can access from their location, even if you're doing your own bookkeeping. And I don't necessarily mean the business owner, but someone in the company. That way somebody can be checking it out. It's a lot easier to get your stuff done. So a little bit less functionality, but certainly more versatile and easier for other people to be involved in it.
And there is a cash flow section on QuickBooks. And despite that being available, you had said you encourage them to create their own cash flow forecast and give them some tools for it. Can you speak to, in the creation of your own cash flow forecast, what's the benefit of creating your own versus using the one in QuickBooks?
Oftentimes the business owners are intimidated by QuickBooks. So I want them just focused on what is going to be happening in your business. So in addition to the cash flow forecast, I've got them creating a budget, which I will then have them enter in QuickBooks once they've finalized it, so they can compare actual to forecast as they look at their reporting. But just to keep it detached, keep it super simple. Here's what you said your sales are going to be. Okay, now when we look at your cash flow forecast, when is that money actually going to hit your bank account? So really kind of blinders on, let's just focus on this element of your business, and let's not get caught up in you don't feel comfortable in QuickBooks or it doesn't feel very natural. So we want to get to the understanding versus them becoming expert bookkeepers, because I don't think business owners should necessarily be their own bookkeepers.
And on cash flow, other than extending your accounts payable and shortening your accounts receivable, what are the other levers that you recommend to those you consult with?
Yeah, so absolutely right. We want to speed up how quickly everything comes in, slow down how quickly everything's going out. Having access to credit is really important. So I encourage all business owners, as soon as they start their company, to get access to credit. And certainly I see people wait. So having a small overdraft or a line of credit at the beginning, if you're a brand new business owner, it's going to be based on your personal credit score, and that's okay. But by setting it up and starting the clock on the credit reputation for the business at the same time as you're starting the business, it allows you, as things increase with the business, for you to be able to get more credit. So I think that's really important, having that access to credit. And then looking at kind of the processes inside of your business and where those potential profit leaks are. So all this work is going on, but money just seems to be disappearing. So if you allow people to pay you later and you don't actually have a collections process, let's get focused on that. Can we set it up so that QuickBooks automatically sends a reminder to get an invoice paid 1 week after it's issued? So let's get very clear about process, because unfortunately, in most businesses, just because you sell more doesn't mean you make more money. So we've got to get good at what we're doing and have good processes in place, and that can then impact how quickly money is coming in and how slowly we can pay our payables. So those are the two things top of mind, and then the pricing, just making sure you're making money.
Yeah, no doubt. And everything you're talking about here, Tracey, reminds me, and I can't remember the name of the gentleman who did it, but it was a gentleman from Scaling Up, Vern Harnish's group, the Growth Institute, during COVID, put out a video talking about cash. And it was one of the best financial videos I have ever seen. I'll send it to you in case you haven't seen it. And really his message was, revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, cash is king and queen. right? You need to have operating cash. And way too many times, entrepreneurs of small businesses think they're making money because they look at the P&L. And you said a few minutes ago, you have to really look at the balance sheet. You need to understand the balance sheet. And to your point, when you first started as an entrepreneur, you don't really look at it. You just look at what's coming in and what's going out. Yeah, and the one concept that he threw out that forever changed what we look at on a monthly basis in our businesses was net operating cash. Right, you're paying down some lines of credit. You have some AR, you got some AP, you got a whole bunch of different factors. Right, how's that really changed? And that really changed the view. Even though for years and years and years, I knew cash flow statements were important, and I knew balance sheets were important. I knew income statements were important. As soon as we started looking at it from the net operating cash perspective, it kind of changed. Are we really doing well, or we think we're doing well? And so that everything you're talking about is really, really resonating with me here today. You mentioned something earlier that a lot of times business entrepreneurs of these, $2 million range businesses reach out to you and say, help. And you said the biggest problem is they lack financial acumen. Okay, got that. But most of the times they're saying help. What is the help? Is it that they're out of cash and they don't know how to grow? Is they're not making enough money for the time they're putting in? What is the root cause when they get gapped enough to call you and say, Tracey, help, I need a trainer?
Lack of profitability. So they're kind of tapped out on all credit if they have it. A lot of business owners don't actually have credit. So they're really like making everything kind of string together, but they just know that things are very, very hard. And so don't have reporting, so can't actually look into it. And they're not getting steady paychecks. And nobody goes into business not to get paid, but unfortunately it happens very often. So.
Well, and I think the problem there that I think you find way too often is that the problem is entrepreneurs get paid last. They're the last one to get paid if there's any money left. If there's no money left, they're not getting paid. Then they wonder, why am I putting in all these blood, sweat, and tears to not get any money? This doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah, then they can't pinpoint what the issue is.
Exactly. And when you're in that phase, right? I look at the $2 million phase as kind of a lifestyle business. This is your job. This is your company and your job, right? This is what brings home the money. And there's this entrepreneurial dilemma that I find. I don't know if you find this with your customers, where when I've been in that position, I look at my business, I go, well, I could afford a bookkeeper, but if I afford a bookkeeper, that's going to cost me X, and that's going to be X less than I'm going to be able to take home. So therefore I don't hire a bookkeeper. And I start becoming a little bit of, Pennywise, dollar foolish in my approach. Do you encounter that a lot?
Absolutely. And I was just having this debate with a couple clients over the last few weeks because they were adamant they were going to do their own bookkeeping. I said, well, why? Like, you don't like it. It's not your strength. And you're really good at sales. So it needs to come down to, if you're freeing up your time and you can pay someone $40 or $50 an hour, what can you do with that time to actually earn more money? Could it be training salespeople, or are you actually doing the sales yourself? Could it be in delivery, which means you're actually going to bring in the money? So I totally agree with what you're saying. You need to look at the bigger picture. But by knowing your numbers, you can actually say, okay, based on all the things I do, this is how much I can generate in an hour. So me paying someone else and freeing up that time, it's actually worth it. So when everything's muddled and confused, it feels like the wrong decision to hire more people. But when you're clear on your numbers, you can make those decisions with confidence and more calm, because you're going to be able to see, if I do this, this is going to happen. So yes, I will have enough money to pay that person. And so getting rid of a lot of those admin type tasks, bookkeeping too. I don't know anyone who loves it except for bookkeepers. And that I'm not saying people shouldn't then look at their own numbers. They should be accountable every single month, at least once a month, looking at their results. They don't have to be the one who enters them into the system.
Sure. Yeah. And as you're talking through this, you talk about, can you replace yourself in that role with somebody who can do it better, so you can spend your time in what you do best? Ultimately, I have found, I don't know if you found this as well, that your job as the entrepreneur is ultimately to replace yourself in every role, so that you're no longer having to work in that business 80 hours a week, but making the income you're looking for. Is that Is that a goal and objective of a lot of the entrepreneurs you work with? And you have to kind of chip away at each level until you can get to that point where they're not working in their business, they're more working on their business, or really a chairman of their own business, as opposed to, being the active member that's doing, the chef, cook, and bottle washer?
Yeah, I would say to varying degrees. So some people, they just want to get up and have their job and have their own business. And so they may delegate certain things because they've got a finite capacity. Others see the bigger potential, and they're looking to be employers in their community. They're looking to make a bigger impact. They're looking to make a bigger impact and do more for their families. So it's really wherever their mindset is. I think most people think that business owners get into business to make a profit, but a lot of times when I ask them that, they kind of look at me. I'm like, well, you're not operating like you're planning to make a profit, or that's your goal. So is that your goal? If you're just trying to be busy every day and employ some people, but not make money, that's okay. It's fine if that's your goal. But what is your goal? And let's get clear on what it is you want to achieve so we can help you. You get there, and you can use the numbers to do it, and you can actually use financing to do it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I asked you early on in the conversation, is the work you do with entrepreneurs for their business or for themselves personally? I think you answered the question very appropriately, as we've been talking the last 15, 20 minutes about all the things you look at in businesses and problems you see and how you work with them. But it also strikes me, you talked a little bit about, how we don't learn these things in school necessarily. And, you don't grow up learning how to do accounting for your business. You learn how to do sales and operations, and, spend a lot of time on that, but not a lot on the finance. But deep rooted in that, one of your missions is, and your love about money and education of money you've brought to youth, is in part your strategy of bringing it to youth so that when they become entrepreneurs later in life, they've learned more about money, or is it for personal finance reasons? And then side to that question is, how often do you work with entrepreneurs where you're working on their business finances and a little bit of it spills over to their personal discipline about money, or their fear or uncomfortableness about money?
I'll go with the second one first. So probably 95% of the time there's spillage over into the personal side, and it gets into their apprehension about money, or how did they grow up, and we just start talking about other things, because sometimes I find it's easy to dig for examples in the personal side that then we can translate to their business. So we get into all this kind of stuff, which is great. And then sometimes they'll be looking for referrals, so I'll refer them to a financial planner who can help them get really organized on the personal side. On the young adult side, I target 18 to 30-ish, but there's younger and older who listen. We've got tons of parents and grandparents who listen. And the show is all around being able to impact your earnings power. So however you're going to make a living, and then how do you deal with the money that you have and be able to pay your bills, be able to save up to hit your goals. So anything that can hit there really qualifies. So I do a lot of content for young entrepreneurs, whether it's a side hustle, whether it's how do they even get into the business. We showcase lots of young entrepreneurs as well, so that they see that that's an opportunity for their future. It's not you're going to go into this job for 40 years and that's going to be your life, because I think that option's off the table now. And so if you are going to go into business, I want you to be smart about it. I want you to do that business plan. I want you to think about, do you like doing this? Are you going to be able to price it right? If not, get on to the next idea. Or if you're not willing to work that hard, realize that up front, get into a job where you're working for somebody else, and transfer your skills and monetize them the best way that you can. So it's pretty much anything we can cover, and always get lots of show suggestions from listeners. We've been going strong, or about to hit our 4-year anniversary with the podcast.
Great.
The biggest question I always get, thank you, is around investing. And so while I like talking about investing, there's so many things that need to be put in the foundation before you start investing. So we try to cover the gamut of topics so that everybody can be more well-informed.
I'm sure as things have evolved as well in the investing world and dealing with youth, they're all asking you about like cryptocurrencies and what's going on and in the social media and all the things they're hearing. So it can get pretty complicated. And I know, Rich, you got a young family that's probably learning about finance as well themselves at this time. And as parents, we have a responsibility to be teaching them, just like your parents did, and giving you a quarter. Maybe, Rich, you give your kids $1, but it's all part of what we need to teach our kids today, right?
Yeah, and that's the key, is actually that everybody is still learning. So I do a lot of shows where I go and learn new things. So I fumbled my way through getting a cryptocurrency wallet, and the first one I got wouldn't link up to my Canadian bank account, so I had to get a different one. And then I went to get some different cryptocurrencies. Then I've been learning about non-fungible tokens. So NFTs are now all the rage, and everybody wants to start collecting them. So if you view it as your digital baseball card collection. So I'm learning, and I'm going to continue to learn. And the funny thing is, it's funny, but it scares me a little bit. It takes me hours to fumble through and do it properly and navigate the risks. Younger people are just getting in and doing these things, but they don't know the risks that are going with them. So I'm trying to highlight, you know what, this took me a couple hours because, and these were the red flags I was seeing all the way through. So just to impart the knowledge, and I believe everybody gets to make their own choices when it comes to their money, as long as they're looking after their life and they're paying their bills. So if you want to go crazy and start collecting NFTs, good for you. Just don't do it at the expense of maybe your money for school or your car payment or your rent or your groceries.
Yep.
Yeah, that's good. You know, not long ago you had said something about automating AR collection out of QuickBooks and having that come straight out of there, automated. What are some other things that you find entrepreneurs can and should automate that they're not?
So even getting their information into QuickBooks, a lot will do manual entering when they can actually sync it up to their bank accounts. Those reminders, client touches as well. So especially I do a lot of work with medical clinics, so physios, massage, chiro, all kinds of things like that. And kind of getting, if you're going to have a treatment plan for someone, can we get all their appointments booked in? Can we get them to put the 10 appointments that they're going to have? Can we, hey, we haven't seen you for a while, get those kind of message going out automated. So a lot of client touch points is a good way to do it. Social media as well. Certainly business owners should have a hand in the copywriting and the messaging and the tone, but also get that outsourced to somebody else. So you can then use a scheduler to automate the programming and all of that stuff. As long as you're staying in touch with what's going on in the world and you're not sending out things at inopportune times. If something happens real time in the world, you're not putting some messages out that are kind of contradictory. So it's still with always that advising and being accountable, but how can we make it a little bit faster and free up some time for everybody?
What do you find entrepreneurs consistently overfund in their business, and what do they consistently underfund?
I like that one.
They consistently underfund their own development, I find. So they don't necessarily, especially in service-based businesses. If we were going to start fast food restaurant, we know we're going to have to get a location. We're going to spend a couple $100,000 at least to set up leaseholds and set up everything in our restaurant. And that's an acceptable level of investment. When we're talking about service-based business, people are not, they're not necessarily clear that they are the asset and they need to invest in themselves to bring up their skills and acumen. So that would be one under investment, as well as on the systems and processes in their business to keep good controls. Because you can't grow your business unless you've got things in a repeatable way, that everybody's doing things in the same way. So it's a pain, it's frustrating, it takes time to develop those kinds of systems, but it frees up so much time in the long run. My business is small. I have a couple employees part-time, but once we started putting systems in place, once we started having turnover, great, here's the process for how we do this. And it speeds up so much time as you navigate from employee to employee. Lots of fun to spend on marketing and not necessarily measuring results. So sometimes I see it a little bit heavy weighted on the marketing side. Where the results may not necessarily be there. And again, they could be working with someone who's doing it for them, or they might be doing it on their own and they maybe need a little bit of assistance there. So a couple areas I see.
Thanks for that. And do you break down with the owners you work with a return on investment for their marketing capital?
Depending on how much they're spending and if it's of interest to them. Yeah.
Okay. And with those who you do it with, if you have some that use media, whether it be TV or radio, or to some extent even online, how do you work with them when it doesn't show a direct ROI with some of the marketing tools, but it actually does provide benefit? how do you deal with that? What are your recommendations generally there?
Well, we have to take a look at how were things before this started. So they could be building themselves out as a thought leader in their industry. And so while it doesn't directly translate to clients, they might get more speaking opportunities. And they know that from every speaking opportunity, they secure X many clients. And so we need to go a little bit broader, and we may not be as tangible as they want to be in terms of the numbers, but we can certainly pinpoint to different things. And if they say, you know what, I've been doing all this speaking and I'm still not getting clients, particularly for somebody who is in something like a medical clinic where they have a very defined client geography, where their clients can be and they're not doing things remotely. Well, it doesn't make sense to be on national radio and news unless you're going to be selling some kind of book. If your goal is to drive more clients in here and get more patients seen, you need to be very targeted in the area that you're in. So we can do some with the numbers, and then some we have to just dig into a little bit more qualitatively.
Isn't that a trap though? Like I found, Tracey, like in my experience, and this is the Pennywise dollar foolish part, that as an entrepreneur, I find myself in with small businesses like that. I would look at what Rich talked about and say, if it's not an ROI, then you need to get rid of it, because I find that way too many times small businesses don't look at how their ROI on their people, their ROI on their marketing spend, and if you can't, invest $1 and get $1.50 back, is that a good dollar to spend? But you bring up a really good point, which is you have to look holistically at the whole thing. But do you find a lot that entrepreneurs, when you look at their balance sheets and their P&Ls and where they're spending their money, that there are a lot of points that they're not generating an ROI, but they're holding on to it, whether it be an employee that they just having a love affair with, not love affair romantically, but they've had that employee for so long, or they've been doing TV ads, their personalities out there, they can't stop doing that, but it doesn't make financial sense. Do you run into that conflict a lot?
I absolutely do. The other thing though is the data. The data is not always good. So we can't actually see, because they'll be like, oh yeah, I made a deal with this guy and we did this and it was an offset. So it wasn't actually in the financial statement. So it's getting to the real story. And then yes, there are a lot of things that emotionally they're kind of hanging on to, where I'll say, and like professionally challenge them around, is this working? Well, yeah, I love it. It's fun. I get to do this, and people in the community see me. Great. Does it bring you clients? Well, I'm sure it does. I don't, and they don't know, or no, it never does. And so then we can put in small things in the business to kind of look at, okay, when you get a new client, can we ask them where they came from? So maybe let's start getting some data to help us figure this out. And sometimes people will need that more quantitative stuff to help them make that decision. But some people will never give up some of those things that you mentioned, because they're just so tied to it and they like to be seen a certain way in their communities where they live.
Yeah, that's interesting that you're going back to the foundational element of tracking where leads come from. My question actually kind of had a false pretense to it, in the assumption that tracking was already happening.
Oh, no.
I'm sure you talk to entrepreneurs of businesses where it's like, find out where the lead came from so you can tell if sponsoring the 5K run made a difference, or putting up all the yard signs made a difference. Like, yeah, absolutely. Tracking the leads and then looking at ROI for sure. I want to get down real tactical with you on financials for just a minute. If I'm one of your entrepreneur clients, give me your vanilla recommendation. How much time per week should I be spending looking at something in the realm of financials?
I think you can get away with half an hour.
Okay. Yeah. And how much time outside of that half hour?
If it's organized and you have data at your fingertips, you're not the one doing it. Okay.
So you would work with them to optimize their financial systems to get to the point where it's only 30 minutes a week.
Yeah.
Got it. Outside of that 30 minutes a week, how much time monthly for things that happen on a 30-day period do you recommend?
For the bookkeeper, it's going to really vary how many transactions there are in the business, because some businesses have very few clients. They're just larger dollar transactions.
Not for the bookkeeper. I'm the entrepreneur. I've got a bookkeeper. What do I need to put in other than a half hour a week? What do I need to put in monthly?
Depends if you've got something new on the go. If you're thinking about a new investment, you might take your cash flow forecast that you have, save a new version, run some what if scenarios. Again, it shouldn't be a large amount of time. If you have quotes that you need to get, maybe you're going to be expanding your office or you're going to be hiring someone. If you can have your bookkeeper dig up that information, again, it shouldn't be a large commitment of time. So maybe 2 hours at the most.
Okay. And then what about annually when it comes to doing a review and doing planning and that type of thing that you'd recommend just doing, maybe once a year? How much time should I consider putting in there?
I would say quarterly, you want to have a more robust review where you're looking at the trending for the 3 months. Most business owners are only looking at the month in isolation or the year to date, but they're not actually tracking month over month and seeing that. So I encourage business owners to take a look at that. Then annually, it will be part of a bigger process because you want to forecast your goals in the business for everything. And the financial is going to have bearing on then what you can achieve. So if you can carve out one to 1.5 days for the annual planning, but that's fulsome in terms of what's my sales strategy, how am I going to accomplish this, am I going to need access to credit because we're going to grow our revenues. And I always encourage business owners to think about any money sitting in receivables or in inventory that's like cash sitting on the floor. Imagine the bags of cash, and the further you grow, the more cash you need to sit on the floor, because sometimes that's the only way people can get their heads around it. Because in your mind, well, I'm doing well, my sales are going up, everything should be fine, but trying to think about that cash flow impact. And certainly I saw it working at the bank. We saw it again during the pandemic. You can have really rapid growth, but you can go under in as quick as 90 days if you don't have the cash there to support it.
So about 10 to 15 hours on the annual side. What's a ballpark on hours quarterly that you're recommending for the review and kind of recast?
Yeah, probably 2 hours.
Okay.
Shouldn't be a lot of time.
Thanks for that.
Unless you see something trending you don't like and you dig into it and you've got to get to the bottom of something. So if you find an error in the bookkeeping or you realize that all of the information hasn't been forthcoming, especially as your company gets bigger. So maybe you're missing some data, or you've got to understand and dig into a strategy because the numbers aren't showing up the way you thought they would. So you've got to go back, but then it's a more holistic thing for the business.
Okay. And I know there are some tools out there, like Keith Cunningham is somebody who got connected with Tony Robbins, or there's a book that has a lemonade stand on the front that's like the basics of accounting. Is there a person or a book that you'd recommend entrepreneurs who are listening and say, I want more of what she has. I'm not ready to use a coach yet, but I want to self-educate. I'm willing to put a little bit of time in. Is there a person or a book you'd recommend?
Profit First is good. I generally see that you do need to be making some money before it's going to actually work for you. But I think that it's a great way to get your hands around the fundamentals because it suggests paying yourself first. But when there's not enough cash, that's very hard to do. But I think if you can start training your brain that way, I think that's a good one.
That's great. You said it was Profit First?
Yeah. And so there's book, there's been adaptations on it that vary by industry. And there's a lot of podcasts out there by Profit First professionals. So you could tune in. The important thing with anything is to find somebody who speaks in a way that makes sense to you and that you can ask questions and you don't feel intimidated.
Yeah. And then that's a little bit of the essence too of that lifestyle entrepreneur is, are you paying yourself first or are you paying yourself last? What's your mindset around that? Tell me, how does the money meeting agenda come into play? That's something that you've launched. I saw it's got some accolades with Toronto Sun and a bunch of other publications. What is the money meeting agenda?
Well, so if you're meeting with yourself or your business partner weekly for those 30-minute meetings, you should be pulling this out, and at least one of your monthly meetings should be going through this. And so if you haven't had kind of a money meeting ever, it's going to give you a place to start. Your first meeting might be just checking it out, but it gives you some prompts in terms of things to look for. I would, if we're going to meet weekly, I would encourage one meeting is going to be to review last month's historical results. Another meeting will be around looking at your cash flow forecast. Another week will be going through and using this money meeting agenda. And you may even have a meeting with your bookkeeper one of the weeks. But if you can keep it in bite-sized chunks, you're going to have your hands around what's actually happening in the business. It's going to bring down the stress and increase the confidence significantly.
So just to go back to where Rich was asking you is different time limits for different periods. Mm-hmm. So the money meeting agenda, is that a template that you have, or it's basically a suggestion that entrepreneurs should have a money meeting every week for 30 minutes?
It is some prompts in an agenda format of things you want to know the answers to.
Gotcha. And so is this an agenda you provide entrepreneurs or you train them on?
So it's available for everybody listening to as a download. So you can grab it at cashcoach.biz.
Okay.
So cashcoach.biz.
Got it.
And
So if our entrepreneurs go to cashcoach.biz, they can get access to this template, and it'll give them the prompts and the framework. Can you give us a few examples there, like last month results, but does it provide the actual template to put those results in, or more of the topics that you should be talking about on a routine basis?
More of the topics and the thought process. So we want to elevate it. It's not about you as the business owner doing the nuts and bolts, but now that it's done, what are you seeing? What changes might you have to make? If something is trending really well, what are you going to do to keep it going? Or if things are not trending the way you want, how are you going to make some changes?
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Tracey, when you work with entrepreneurs and businesses, very similar in those first 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, I'm not sure exactly what time the initial engagement is, because there's probably some heavy lifting to do in the first 6 months or so. How often are you interacting with that business on the onset versus the routine maintenance after you kind of get it on the right track?
Absolutely. So I work with them in terms of a coaching capacity. So I don't stay with them ongoing. So it's anywhere from kind of 2 to 4 or 5 months, depending how quickly we move through the curriculum on their pace, and then making sure they're set up with a good bookkeeper and accountant so they can then run things themselves, and they've got the professionals behind them to support them.
That's great. So I'm assuming you work with, I'm assuming when you're doing these engagements, you're reviewing, are they in the right place in terms of a tax preparer? Are they in the right place in terms of a financial advisor? Are their insurance policies in the right place? So you can kind of guide them to set them up with the right advisor. So when your assignment's done, they're in ship-shop shape. You can kind of move on to the next person who needs some fitness. Is that kind of the approach?
Exactly.
Makes a lot of sense. Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't my lifelong passion or dream to be an accountant or a bookkeeper. So I want to get them with the people who can help them. But unfortunately, I've seen so many business owners waste a lot of time and money with the wrong people, and they have to do things over multiple times sometimes. Yeah,
I can just imagine that the impact you're making on some of these businesses from the time you start to the time you leave is pretty dramatic, because I look at this the same way as editing your own paper when you're in college, right? You can write a paper, you think it's the best paper ever, and I hand it over to Rich, and sure enough, he sends it back to me, and he's red marks all over the place, right? My grammar's off here, because you don't see it, you don't see your own stuff. So by going in as a fitness trainer, someone else's business, you can really pinpoint things quickly for their benefit in a short period of time and put them in ship-shop shape. So I love the way that you're going up that business. People can find some more information at cashcoach.biz to find that money meeting agenda. And if they'd like to reach out to you personally, is your contact information as well on that site, or is there another place they should be going?
It is, but LinkedIn's the best place to reach out to me. So Tracey has an E and Bissett has 2 S's, 2 T's, and would love to hear any comments or questions. And after you download the money meeting agenda, you'll be right on my website.
Awesome. Well, Tracey, thank you very much for your time today, and really appreciate the information you shared with us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a fun interview.
Please stick around for a few more minutes while Rich and I break down this episode.
John, one of the things she talked about early on in the podcast was getting access to credit. She didn't say the words "when you don't need it," but I feel like that's where she was going. I've heard that before. I think that's excellent advice. Is looking at cash flow. People don't go out of business because the P&L is negative. They go out of business because they don't have money to pay their bills. And you can pay your bills either with cash or credit. And the best time to get credit is when you don't need it. It's when people are going to extend it to you, is right in the midst of, I don't need credit, I'm doing well.
That's right. Yeah, and, we talked about this to your point in other frames too. Talk to investors when you don't need them. Talk to banks when you don't need them. Talk to salespeople, even if you don't need a salesperson right now. They may be a salesperson in the future for you. Always be networking, always be having these conversations, but establishing credit is so critical. And I'll tell you what, something changes in an entrepreneur when they go to a bank as a small business, small, medium-sized business. go get a line of credit and have to put their personal guarantees on the line. They start looking at every dollar spent a little bit differently. The discipline comes in a little bit differently, because now you're thinking, oh, wait a minute, this isn't just, if it doesn't work out, so what? I'm vouching for this. So getting a line of credit or getting credit to your business's name is a powerful tool, so long as you have the financial acumen and discipline to maintain it as well. And that's the one thing that Tracey talked, initially about. What's the biggest problem you have? Entrepreneurs who start their own business don't have the financial acumen they should have to be running a business. They got the sales acumen, the operations back. They know what they're doing in terms of their product or service, but they never really got the formal or proper education on the financials.
I wanted to dig in with her on the automating things in the back of my mind, and she wouldn't have known Vinny Fisher's name. But, we did the podcast with Vinny Fisher, and I remember one of the things he said was that you can automate everything going in there. So you can pull up a P&L daily and it's 100% accurate. And too many times people manually input information and look at it 30 to 45 days after what's actually happening. So I was really pleased to hear from her, like even the AR collection, I hadn't heard. I don't know if you knew that you can have QuickBooks handle AR collection and communication. I think that's a great automation. But she went to where Vinny recommends and really gets into, which is syncing up the bank accounts. Why are we manually entering things? We just sync it up, give a password one time, and forevermore, it's going to be there.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it goes a step further, Rich. She talked a lot about processes and controls as well. And when you have processes and controls in your business, things get easier. And when you don't, you don't. And connecting as many dots as possible to have as many things automated or having a process for it or controlled around it will help. Manual entry versus syncing up of data will eliminate, fat fingers, right? When you're knuckle busting something in and it's wrong. Doing your proper bank reconciliations on a monthly basis. I had a business recently that was fairly large, fairly complex, and it took 45 days or so after the month to find out how we actually did, because things were not automated financially. And it was very, very, very difficult. We had no clue at the end of the month how we actually did. We thought we did okay. We weren't sure. It was all feel. And when you transition that to what you just talked about, to a business where you actually can look at a dashboard every day and have your KPIs that Tracey talked about, like knowing what your KPIs are and having 30-minute money meetings with your partners or your bookkeeper every week to talk about a different topic. I'd love to see your template of all the different topics that she's talking about, because once you have it right in front of you, you can now manage, right? You can't manage what you can't measure, right? Is what we always used to talk about. Well, if you don't have clarity to your finances, how are you managing your business? You'll never be prepared for that moment where you're like, oh crap, now I need cash, or now I need credit, or now I, realize my numbers aren't where they're supposed to be.
If I add up the hours that she was recommending, it's relatively small, right? A half hour a week, and you could, with the right automations and the right dashboards, just a half hour a week to really be on your game on financials. 2 hours a month to really do what you need to do, another 2 hours a quarter, and then 10 or 15 hours on the annual. Like, that makes sense. And my guess is the majority of entrepreneurs aren't taking that small amount of time, and they're ignoring financials, which are exactly why she has a business.
But Rich, it's human nature. How many people spend 30 minutes a month balancing their own checkbook?
Right.
Their personal checkbook. Yet we're expecting them to do it for their business. They don't even do it for their own personal finances.
Yeah.
So there's a human nature element here of financial acumen that I think Tracey's bringing to light. And I love her approach to starting with kids. Look, you have a bank account. You have money coming in. You have money going out. How are you generating more money? We talked a little bit offline about, as young kids get their first jobs, are they getting paid appropriately? How do they feel about getting paid? Are they, being rewarded for their work? Things like that. So there is this financial acumen piece that I think is lacking in society. And she mentioned it as well, like in the schools in Canada or in the United States. They don't teach financial entrepreneurship in schools. They'll teach you how to sell, how to do marketing. That's very popular classes. But the finance looks at, I don't want to be an accountant, therefore I'm not going to that class, as opposed to learning the basics of finance and entrepreneurship.
Yeah. Yeah. In some manner, every entrepreneur is an accountant. And as they let go of other areas of the business, the one that they often want to keep is some element of the accounting, of the financials, of the health of the business. Do you happen to remember? Here's your pop quiz. Do you happen to remember when I said to her, what do people consistently overfund and underfund? And you're like, oh, that's a good question. Do you remember the first thing she said?
Yes, their own development.
Yes. The very first thing. She didn't even go. The order I asked was overfund and underfund. The very first thing was underfund their personal development. Yep. And to realize that they are an asset. And you and I have talked about this on other podcasts on that we could not recommend more that entrepreneurs go find coaches for different areas of their business where they would like to get better. And here we have somebody on who is just that, a coach of financials in Tracey. And I couldn't continue to recommend more to overfund, if anything, our own development.